EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is likely the cheapest and easiest commander deck you will ever have to put together. It is a very particular video that I decided to make, and there's a commander that I've sort of been obsessing over lately, which I will be talking about again in another video. There's going to be 3 videos total where I talk about it, and in fact, I recorded that video first. And as I was recording it, I realized there was something important there that I had to talk about in a different video. And something that I don't talk about much on my channel or really at all is the whole barrier to entry in Commander. Whether you be a new Commander player, so obviously you've played other formats, you've played Magic for a while, you haven't played Commander yet. I don't know how many people still out there, fall into the category of, I've been playing Magic for a long time, but I've never played Commander. I think just about everyone has at this point. Or if you are just a new Magic player, you never played Magic before, you got a bunch of buddies that they play in their, Commander pod all the time and you want to join in, but, there's that barrier to entry. It can be a little expensive putting a deck together. It's a bit of a slog sometimes as well. This is going to be the easiest way, in my opinion, for you to do it, right? You're just some guy. And again, if you're a longtime Commander player, Magic player, all that, sure, you can take all these ideas and run with it. But this video in particular is going to be for people who, I only got a couple of bucks in my pocket and I got buddies that play Commander and I want to play with them. This is the video for you. So the commander we're building around here is Plargg, Dean of Chaos. This is my new favorite commander, and I will be making a whole nother video talking about this guy. I just talked about him in a 5 builds video, so it will be 3 videos total where I talk about him. He really is, funny enough, a really interesting build around, even though when I first saw him, I thought he was terrible. So 1 in a red, Orc Shaman 2/2, tap, discard a card, draw a card. And just with that ability alone, I think if you just had a commander that looted, regardless of what colors it was, there's probably a lot you could do there, right? I've talked about in the past. This is something else you could do with Plargg. I believe I mentioned him in a previous 5 builds video even. Yeah, so maybe this is the 4th video where I've talked about him. If you were just doing looting, what you could do is, do a lot of color specific things. Like for example, a Pyroblast is the easiest example. There's a card that's fantastic if your opponents are playing blue. And if they're not playing blue, it's completely useless. Just throw it away and draw a new card, right? So that's something else you could do here. But that main ability, though, is what we're going to build around here. 4 in a red and tap, reveal cards on the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, put the reveal cards not cast this way into the bottom of your library in random order. And that is an ability that will allow us to hunt for very specific cards. And that is what we're doing here. As I'm going, though, and I will sort of build onto this. We're going to start with a very basic idea and we're going to build onto it. And as I go, I'm going to tally the budget here because, of course, budget is going to be a big issue, right? As far as barrier to entry goes in the Commander format, budget is obviously an issue. It's telling me here this is a 15-cent card, okay? Plargg itself is a 15-cent card, which is incredible that a rare could be that cheap, okay? It doesn't get much cheaper than that for a rare in the game of Magic. 15 cents. This guy cost. I'll just say right now, this deck, even if you build the more expensive versions, is going to be likely cheaper than a coffee at Starbucks, okay? So it's definitely going to be in the budget range. I'll also point out there is a back to this card, which you could use or not. So Augusta Dean of Order, 2 in a white, human cleric, 1/3. Other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0. Other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1. Whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. So this side likely we won't be using, but obviously it makes it so that our Commander deck can be white as well. Again, if you're new to the Commander format, I will be informing you that this is a both white and red Commander, so we can put white cards in the deck. That is important. However, this can be a mono red deck, and in fact, that even could play into the ease of putting this deck together. One of the reasons why this idea that I have specifically, not necessarily this Commander, but the idea I have, is so easy to throw together is because the majority of this deck can be, it doesn't have to be, but can be basic lands. And of course, basic lands is the easiest thing to get your hands on in the game of Magic or Commander or whatever. Again, if you're new to it, you could probably likely go to your LGS. I mean, my LGS used to do this back in the day. I've had people tell me they do as well. You can just go to your local gaming store and they'll just give you basic lands for free. They just got a bunch of them lying around. Maybe not. Even if they're not free, they're going to be next to nothing as far as cost goes. And the fact that this deck is going to be mostly basic lands means that cost is going to essentially be zero, right? You could even just do a monocolored deck here because the only other card we're going to put in this deck is Seismic Assault. And because it's a red card and it also only costs red mana, we can just put mountains in this deck. You don't even need plains. You could just have the way you could build this deck if you wanted to have the lowest possible barrier to entry to get into the commander format is I have a mono red deck with Plargg as the commander, Seismic Assaults in the 99, and the rest of the deck is 98 mountains. That is all you would need. You just would need to purchase 2 cards, and Seismic Assault being about a 50-cent card. Again, depends on where you're getting it from or what country you live in, but it's about a 50-cent card, so we're up to 65 cents now. So less than $1. Depending on the right circumstances, maybe your LGS doesn't give away basic lands for free, especially if you ask for 98 of them. They might be like, 98? You could even just do all mountains if you want to really simplify. And I know people will say, okay, well, that's lame. A lame deck, boring. I don't know about all that. I actually think it's not a terrible, like you will be interacting a lot, right? For me, the most important part of a commander game is the interaction between players. And if you have an enchantment on the battlefield that says discard a land card, it deals 2 damage to any target, and you're sitting there with a bunch of lands in hand, there's a lot of interaction involved there. And in fact, there even could be some politics involved there where your opponent is attacking, another opponent with, say, their Virtus the Veiled, which is going to obviously have them lose half their life, and just discarding 1 land can get it off the table, right? They're not going to attack you, obviously, because you can so easily kill it. And if they attack another opponent, maybe you can strike a deal. Hey, man, you don't want to lose half of your life. I can just easily get that off the table for you, right? There's actually, surprisingly, that's why I love this card so much and why I think it is. I've thrown out a lot of ideas of building your deck around Seismic Assault because it is really interactive in a commander game to just be able to throw 2 damage around to any target. Someone's got an Oko on the table, right? And they don't want their commander being turned into an elk. You can just chuck a couple lands into the graveyard and get that Oko off the table, right? So you can really easily manipulate a lot of outcomes in the game with a Seismic Assault on the table and a bunch of lands in hand. So just that alone, again, 65 cents, 2 cards and a bunch of basic lands, you can have, maybe it's not the greatest thing in the world, but you can have a commander deck that is actually very interactive in a commander game. Now, we can go on more from here, right? A lot of people will say, okay, well, someone will just remove your Seismic Assault. Very true. They definitely could, although I would argue that they probably would not. You're not exactly blowing people away by dealing 2 damage to any target by discarding a land, right? There are so many better targets in a commander game that I don't think anyone's going to touch this. If someone has enchantment removal in their hand, it is likely they're going to use it for something that is either more threatening to them or more powerful, just like a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe or something like that. Most removal in the format, in fact, most enchantment removal in the format is also going to be artifact removal. So it's going to be destroy target artifact or enchantment. So that means there's even more options for that person, which means of all the artifacts and enchantments on the table, is your Seismic Assault the most threatening one? Likely not. And then we get to the, Beast Within and Generous Gift and Anguished Unmaking, those ones that are hitting anything, and there's no chance that your Seismic Assault is going to be a target for those. So I really don't think that's going to be that big of an issue. However, obviously we can build around it, and this is where we're going to add white cards to the mix. And of course, there is an absolute ton of white cards that you can throw in this deck that are super cheap that will get your Seismic Assault out of the graveyard or protect it. Of course, we have to feed into the 3 mana value or less scenario. Do you want it to be 3 mana value less or not? If you don't want it to, there's options to go get. If you do want it to, there's options you can go get. I think the best option is Tragic Poet. That is the card that I'm now going to add to this deck, right? And I'm also going to add it to our tally. Again, we're going to go down the road of I'm going to add cards to this deck, and you can stop wherever you want. You can stop with, I just have a 98 land deck with Seismic Assault in it. That's my barrier to entry just because my buddies are playing Commander and I want to join in. And I don't really care if I win. I just want to join in with what my buddies are doing. That's the easiest way to do it. Now, maybe I'll throw a Tragic Poet in there because I kind of like the deck. I'm having fun. I like, interacting with my opponents, but it is getting removed from time to time. And then I kind of sit there and don't do a whole lot. Tragic Poet is a 3-cent card, guys. Again, doesn't get much cheaper than that. So we're going to add that onto our tally. And of course, we're at 68 cents now. And the reason I picked Tragic Poet is because, of course, with our commander's ability, we don't know the card we're going to get, right? If we pick something else, what if our Seismic Assault's not in the graveyard? Right? That thing that returns it immediately. Tragic Poet is something that is going to return it when we feel like it. So we can use our Plargg, and instead of getting our Seismic Assault, we got a Tragic Poet. Okay, well, it says tap, sacrifice Tragic Poet, return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So that means we can just have it sit there. Okay, we don't have to use it right away. Now we got our Seismic Assault, and our Tragic Poet will just sit there until we want to sacrifice it to get our Seismic Assault back. Or if we get it after, that's fine too. Both scenarios work. That's why I like Tragic Poet here. It's also a really cheap card, right? A lot of other people will say, okay, well, how are you supposed to actually win the game? Throwing that damage around to your individual opponents. I mean, there's just no way. I will argue, though, as I have done so many times in my videos talking about win cons, your win con is also my win con, right? You're sitting there, you're not a target, you're not a threat. Everyone thinks you have a laughable deck. They're just going to sit there ignoring you. I promise you that's what they're going to do. The guy with the Ristic Study, the guy with the, the more powerful commander, all of that. Those guys are all going to be a target. That's the way commander works, right? They're not going to use their removal on you. They're likely not even going to attack you. You're probably going to be mostly ignored, and they're going to be killing each other. Again, that Psychosis Crawler is hitting everyone's life totals, including your other opponents. That Gutter Snipe is hitting your other opponents. Everyone's life total is getting lower, and you might actually get to the point where, hey, I got like 5 or 6 lands in hand. Bam! I can just, in an instant, everyone's ignored me, and I can knock out that last guy because he's only got like 7 life left or something like that. Could happen. However, if you want to make your life a little easier as far as closing out the game, you can also throw a Glintorn Buccaneer in the deck. Things are getting a little more expensive now. This card's like $250. Okay, so now we're getting to that Starbucks coffee range. Again, depending on where you come from or what kind of coffee you order from Starbucks, mine's around $350. So now we're getting there, right? We're at $318 if we add in a Glintorn Buccaneer. But of course, Glintorn Buccaneer is that 3 mana value, so we can also hunt for it. Whether we get it before or after the Seismic Assault doesn't really matter a whole lot. And whenever you discard a card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So slowly, as you're discarding those Seismic Assault lands to deal damage to individual targets, you're also dealing 1 damage to each opponent. All right, now, again, this might make you more of a target. So the more cards we add in here, obviously, the more threatening you're going to be. I mean, this just goes hand in hand. It's, do you want to be a threat or not? The more cards you add in, the more expensive this deck is going to be, and the more of a target you're going to be. However, I will argue that if all you have in your deck is a Glintorn Buccaneer, a Seismic Assault, a Tragic Poet, and your commander is Plargg, I really don't think you're going to be a target in a commander game. Your table would have to be incredibly janky and casual in order for that to be the case. But now, Glintorn Buccaneer is going to help you close out the game. It's going to give you more of a win con than just using your Seismic Assault. But again, removal's a thing. How long is your Glintorn Buccaneer going to sit on the battlefield? Again, because your commander, that ability to activate it, can go hunt for those cards, you can use it whenever you want. You don't have to throw your Glintorn Buccaneer out there right away. You can just save it. Just wait until the game gets closer to ending. Then I go hunt again and get my Glintorn Buccaneer maybe, right? And I will also point out that Plargg's ability is a may. You don't have to do it, right? If you use your Plargg ability and Glintorn Buccaneer is the first thing you flip off the top, you can just say, I don't really want it right now. We'll tuck it back on the bottom because that's where it goes. Any cards revealed this way that aren't cast go on the bottom. So if you choose not to cast your Glintorn Buccaneer in that moment, tuck it on the bottom and you can get it back later. And in fact, because of Plargg's ability being worded that way, you can really sort of order your library in the order of the cards that you want to get. So I can, keep doing it. I mean, it is mana intensive, but you can keep doing it until you get those cards on the bottom in order of how you want to end up getting them. You just keep using your commander's ability until you get the card you want. Say you want your Seismic Assault, and then you know which cards you've tucked on the bottom, so you know the order that you're going to get them, right? We could very easily, though, throw Cavalier Flame in this version of the deck, and this is not a 3 mana value card, but it is a card that you could throw into the 99. So now we've got, if we want to keep going here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 cards in the 99. So 95 basic lands and 4 99 cards that aren't lands, obviously, right? By the way, it's not going to be difficult for you to make land drops, another advantage to this build. This card is about a $2 card, okay? but it is very much going to help us close out the game. So now we're up to $5, a little over $5. I will also point out, by the way, let's go back to Plargg for a second. Remember, your commander's got a looting thing, right? So that looting thing where I discard and draw, I can just discard a land and draw a land, right? I can just do that. And why would you do that? Well, I'm going to, first of all, trigger my Glinthorn Buccaneer if that's in play, right? Again, that's helping you win the game. But also, I'm going to be filling my graveyard with lands, which will help my Cavalier of Flame win us the game as well. So 2 red, 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 Elemental Knight, 6/5. Pay 1 and a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn, which actually is not a completely useless ability, of course. You can just put lots of mana into that. It also gives our Plargg haste, which can be kind of important, certainly. Also gives itself haste, which, you can't just make this guy big and swing with it. It is going to help us close out the game. It's a decently sized creature. When it enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards. So this is giving us a bunch of discard triggers. That's great. Works with our Glinthorn Buccaneer. When it dies, though, it deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control for X the number of land cards in your graveyard. This is certainly a way to help close out the game. And, there's no way for us to get this. It is obviously because it's a 5 mana value card. We're not able to hunt for it. It's just maybe we'll draw it. And again, since we're looting with our commander, keep in mind, that's essentially draw 2 cards every single turn if we're using our commander's ability, which means we will get to it faster. Are we going to get it? Maybe, maybe not. It's just a way to help close out the game if we get it. I mean, that's the case with almost every card in your deck when you're playing commander, unless you got tutors, right? Unless you're actually tutoring for your win con, but you got to draw tutors too if you want to tutor for your win cons, I guess, unless your commander's a tutor, which funny enough, our commander kind of is, but this is not fitting into the mana value. So this is just a luck of the draw sort of scenario. But again, you've put together the 98 or 97 land version of this deck. You've been playing it a few times. You've been having some fun. Now you just want to throw in this card to help you win games. An extra couple of bucks, not too shabby. People will say, we're going to get empty-handed really fast because of all the cards we're discarding, and you would be correct. Wheel of Fate is the next card I'm going to add in to this list. Again, we're starting at a certain point and we're adding. Now we're up to 5 or 6 cards, depending on what you want to include here. And we are adding another about $250 to our price total. So $7.68 is the running tally I have here. Now we're up to a more expensive drink at Starbucks. Again, go to Starbucks with my wife or my daughter, and they're getting drinks that cost about this much. So pretty cheap for a commander deck, certainly. And of course, Wheel of Fate's going to be great here for a couple of reasons. Has no mana cost, right? And as I will talk about coming up in the next video, that means that we can cast it with our Plargg, right? Because Plargg is looking for a card that is mana value 3 or less, and this is mana value 3 or less. It is mana value 0. It has suspend 4, 1 and a red, so we can suspend it if we draw. And remember, any of these cards that I'm talking about here, I'm up to 6 cards in the 99. Any of those cards we can just draw, and that's fine if we do. And with this card in particular, the fact that it has suspend is actually probably a good thing, because we can stick it in suspend, and then when it's about to go off, again, this is the beauty of Seismic Assault. Just throw all my lands around, deal a bunch of damage, and then refill my hand, right? Because of course, when it resolves, each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. So this works great with Seismic Assault because it can refill our hand, and obviously you can put more wheel effects in here. I picked this one because it is cheap. Again, it is one of the cheapest versions as far as a wheel goes. And then also it is one that we can cast with our commander. And remember, we use our commander's ability. We have 7 cards in hand. We flip a Wheel of Fate off the top. I don't want to cast that right now. I'll stick it on the bottom. And on the bottom is likely where you want it. Then I will, after I activate my commander's ability a couple more times, I will get to it. And then I will cast it when I have no cards in hand, right? So keep that in mind as well. This one in particular is one that you definitely want to cast at a very specific time, right? So we're going to add that to this version as well. Again, we're just making this very plain version of our Seismic Assault deck better and better and better as we go. I will also point out, again, if you're worried about your Seismic Assault or maybe even your Glinthorn Buccaneer or any of these other cards getting removed and you want to get them back, there's lots of ways to get stuff back. Savine's Reclamation, let's throw that out there, right? So now I just want more versions, right? My deck's getting a little better. My stuff's starting to become a target because the guys in my pod are starting to realize that my deck isn't that goofy, that I can actually close out games. So my stuff is starting to become a target. We're going to throw a Savine's Reclamation in this deck. This is only shockingly A 13-cent card? Wow, it has been reprinted an absolute ton. So now we're up to 781. Again, we're still under $8 here, and we've added quite a few pretty good cards in my opinion. 2 and a white sorcery. Return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If that spell is cast from graveyard, you may copy the spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, and has flashback 4 and a white. And this is a pretty good one, and you can use this, obviously to get back your Seismic Assault, your Glinthorn Buccaneer, most of the cards I've talked about already, but you can also just get a land, right? That's the funny thing with this card is if I use this early in the game and let's say I activate my commander's ability and I flip this off the top, again, I can just say, okay, well, I don't want to cast this right now. I'll tuck it on the bottom. You almost guaranteed though, have a land in your graveyard because you've been looting with your commander. And of course, since your deck is mostly lands, you're discarding lands into your graveyard. So the worst case scenario for this card is I just get a land out of my graveyard and I put it into play. And then, of course, it goes to your graveyard where it has flashback. And I can then later in a game, now someone has cast a Bane of Progress or something. My Seismic Assault goes to the graveyard. I flash back on my following turn, getting back my Seismic Assault, and then also another land or Glinthorn Buccaneer or whatever. So this is also a pretty great fit in the deck as well. And in fact, you could even bump it up the list. It's only a 15-cent card or a 13-cent card or something. So really budget version for this deck. You could also, as I will talk about in a later video, the more, I guess, less janky, let's say, version of this deck, I started adding in legendary things, and you can add in as much legendary cards as you want into this deck because, of course, your commander doesn't get legendary cards. So the Iron Crag, for example, is a mana rock that you can just throw in this version of the deck. You can throw as many as you want, right? This is only a 20-cent card, so an easy include here. So now we're up to $8, right? You can also add in Phial of Galadriel, another legendary mana rock, which also happens to be a pretty cheap card, 25 cents. If you want more suggestions, right? You're that guy who you haven't really built a commander deck before, and you haven't built your own Plargg, whatever the case may be, or if you're a guy who just wants a fun, janky deck, I'm just throwing out where I would go next. For me, if I'm like, okay, I really like this deck, I'm having fun with it, where I'm going to go next, I'm going to start adding in legendary permanents because legendary permanents won't be found by my commander. So they're sort of freebies. You are taking lands out of your deck. So again, how high do you want your land count to be? Obviously, you also can start adding in non-basic lands, right? You can start adding in stuff that is going to just assist you in what you're doing. Some of them are going to be more expensive. Some of them are going to be cheaper. You can add in a high market, which will allow you to sacrifice your Cavalier Flame. But of course, that's a $4 card, so maybe it's not worth it for you. I would suggest to add in a Ghost Quarter or something that can destroy lands because that's something that I think every commander deck needs. And Ghost Quarter is probably the cheapest version. It's certainly a good version. It's only about 50 cents. So I will add that onto the tally. But again, that's another direction you could go is, okay, now I start adding in non-basic lands, utility lands that are going to help me do things that I need to do in a commander game. The last card I'm going to add on here, though, is the combo with Seismic Assault, which is land tax. And again, depends how much money you want to spend. How high is your barrier to entry? This is going to be the most expensive card in the deck by far, in fact. It is looking like a about $15 card, so it is more expensive than the entire rest of the deck combined, which, again, $15 is not a lot of money. It certainly is a couple of cups of coffee at a Starbucks, though, so it depends on how far you want to go with this. I've been having fun with this deck. Everything's working out. I've been adding in these cards to make the deck run more smoothly. And, as I become more of a target, I have to have the recursion for my Seismic Assault. I'm having trouble closing out games, though. Land tax is really going to make this deck hum. Of course, it is a mana value 3 or less card, so it is one that you can hunt for with your commander. And again, it depends on how many of these you want to add in. There is a total of the ones I've talked about so far, 6 cards that are in the 99 of this deck that we can hit with our commander. So maybe you're getting to the point where, okay, maybe I have too many cards in the 99 that I can hit with my commander because activating your commander 6 times possibly before you get your Seismic Assault, which is essentially the card that you're building this deck around, that might not be a good thing. So you might want to bring that number down a little bit. You might want to just take out a few of these so that the consistency of getting your Seismic Assault is a lot better That again, that's the problem. That's the upside of the I only have Seismic Assault in the 99 version is you're guaranteed to get it. As soon as you add one more card, okay, now you're not guaranteed to get it. Now you have to activate your commander more times in order to get the actual card that you're building around here. If I was building this deck and budget wasn't as much of an issue for me, again, if we add in the land tax, we are up to 23.76. That is our top price for this deck. So a $23 deck, not too shabby, and it's going to run a lot more consistently. That's not bad at all. You can just do the 65-cent version of this deck. For me, if I was throwing this deck together, I would get land tax a lot quicker. I wouldn't save it till the end. I would get it probably second right after the Seismic Assault, because it is going to partner with the Seismic Assault so well and make it a lot more effective, make our game plan a lot more effective here, right? So a 1 white mana enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, which of course you will make sure that happens, you may search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. It is not difficult to manipulate the outcome here to make sure you have less lands than your opponent. If you're doing this combo in the deck, you will just not make land drops. And guess what? Not making land drops is great for us because we want those lands to discard to our Seismic Assault. And in fact, probably 5 lands you could just stop and not play more than 5 lands because of course you don't need necessarily, but you likely will need 5 mana to activate Plargg's ability. So 5 lands will give you that if you haven't added any of those mana rocks to the deck, and then just stop playing lands. All the lands you draw just stay in your hand so that you can discard them. And of course, on your upkeep, you will go get 3 lands out of your deck. You're never going to run out because you have 90 plus lands in your deck. And then you will have, at the very least, minimum 6 damage every turn to throw around. That's pretty darn good. That's definitely going to make you a threat. So if you want to add in all the cards that I talked about, you're going to be around $23. You're going to be under $25 for sure. Again, unfortunately, land tax, which is really good in this deck, is easily the most expensive card. If you want to make the super budget version, you're under $1. Even if you add in a few of these other cards, you're only going to be around $1, maybe $2. The barrier to entry here is really low, right? It is, first of all, super, super cheap, right? Again, budget is a big thing for people when making commander decks. And if you happen to have an LGS that just gives away basic lands, you could just walk up to the guy at the front counter and be like, 98 basic lands, please, and see what kind of a look he gives you and start from there, right? The barrier to entry for this deck is incredibly low. You only need Plargg and a Seismic Assault, and then the rest are basic lands. And then you can slowly start adding in these other cards as needed. Again, if you like what's happening and you're having fun interactions in games, again, if winning is all that matters, this is certainly not going to be the deck for you, but nobody will be able to deny the fact that having a Seismic Assault in play and a bunch of lands in hand is going to make it interactive for you. You are certainly going to be interacting with your opponents a lot. You could play the politics game a whole bunch here. I think it actually will be fun to sit down and play. And again, if you're not a big Magic player, another thing here is there's not a lot of huge rules to work around, right? You're just discarding lands to deal damage. It's pretty simple. So if you're not a huge rules lawyer and you're new to the game of Magic, or maybe you've never even played Magic before, pretty simple. I'm just getting Seismic Assault into play, and then I'm discarding my lands to deal 2 damage. So there's not a lot of complicated rules to figure out with this deck either. That's another reason why it is a incredibly low barrier to entry. And as you go, you learn the game more, you add in more of these pieces, and you just keep adding 1 card at a time and taking out a land. That's it. Again, super easy to figure out where we're going here. We're just going to take out a basic land and put in some other card as I go. That's why I really like this idea, and that's why I think it's particularly great for newer Commander players or just new Magic players in general. If you're looking for a deck list, I don't have one. I don't think it's necessary. Plargg, Seismic Assault, that's it. The rest is basic lands, and then you can go from there, adding in what you want. Incredibly low barrier to entry into the Commander format with as far as cards I need to grab, because you only need to grab 2. As far as budget, because obviously the bottom for this deck is under $1. And also as far as knowing the rules of the game, you don't really have to know much. You only have to know how your commander works and the fact that I can discard a land to deal 2 damage. That's all you need to know. Pretty simple, I think. So if you are new to the Commander format, I think this is a great option for you. And if you've been playing the Commander format for years and you just think this is a funny, interesting deck to build, It's also a really low barrier to entry for those people because obviously you only need a few cards and it's not going to cost a lot of money. So you can run away with this idea if you want as well. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.